You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 409, The Rule of Two. My goodness, we announced this episode back in the fall of last year, and just because of scheduling's problems and things, it just kept getting pushed further and further back. And we thought, you know what? We've been hot and heavy into the High Republic, which has been really awesome. But we thought we take a break from that and come and visit a topic that I think is probably going to be more available, accessible to a lot of folks, and something that I have spent a ton of time researching over the last like 3 or 4 days, going back and reading a lot of cool books. And what I hope to do in this is really understand the rule of two in itself, but also get into whether or not we feel like this was successful, right? Was this as, Bane had this idea of what the Sith had to be and how to restore power and what true Sith power meant. And I really want to kind of take a reflective, deep look into that and just say, okay, was he right? Or was there something that he overlooked? And maybe look ahead to the future to see what could be in store for us with the rule of two going forward. So, and speaking of the rule of two, I don't know, which one are you? Are you the master or the apprentice? I don't know.
I don't know, but do what must be done.
Okay,
Lord
you're definitely,
Padilla.
you're definitely the master then. How you doing, Jonesy's with us tonight. Jonesy, welcome to the show.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How about you this evening?
I'm doing great. I've been giddy.
You've been giddy.
Oh yeah, this is fun. I mean, anytime I get a chance to like dive into like old Republic stuff, and we're going to get into legend. We'll be talking about legend stuff.
I was just going to touch a little of everything. Yeah.
It is. It really is. We're going to talk legends. We'll talk about canon. We'll make some stuff up. But it's been.
That'd be 90% of it, and we're all going to do it in 45 minutes.
No. Yes.
No,
you buckle up, man, because this may be a long show. I think I've got like 18 pages of notes here to get through.
Right.
So pretty excited about that. What else is going on? How was your like experience in revisiting a lot of this material? Because we haven't, I think since the last time we were like hyper focused on something Sith, it might have been like the lightsaber episode that we did a couple years back, right?
Yeah, I think so. It's been a while. And so this was a lot of fun because we don't really get to dwell on, well, really, we don't get to really bridge legends and current canon stuff very often because there's usually such a stark cutoff of when something is what used to be and what is. And the Sith there's been a bit of revisionist history going on as we go through, and maybe not revisionist, but we've enhanced, I think, some of the legends material as a result. And so this is one where it's still so shrouded in mystery.
Ooh.
And we get little tidbits here and there with like secrets of the Sith and those types of stories, or really just material.
Reference material.
Handbooks. Yeah, it really is more like a handbook or a journal, but it's really cool to be able to flow through all of that and see what still sticks, what makes sense, and really, like you were saying before, does this stuff make sense, and did it work? Does it work? And how does it really fit in with what we know of everything now, considering that the Sith have been so, especially High Republic, they've been so non-visible.
Absent? Yeah.
Yeah. They're lurking somewhere. We know that, but where is it at, and when are they going to resurface? So I think this is a really great time to be able to revisit this type of topic.
Yeah. And we don't have any news.
We had one small thing.
Oh, yeah, we do have one small thing. What was that? You mentioned it before we came on the air here.
Yeah, Giancarlo Esposito was on, I forgot what show he was on, but he made a brief comment about Mando Season 3, that he had some things to go back and still do to wrap up, but he believes that it will be out as soon as this summer, which is very different than what a lot of us have been presuming, that it would be November, December.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how much stock I put into that, because if he's going back and doing any kind of redubs or anything like that, usually that means there's still more work to do. But
right.
It clearly everything is done, right? And now they're just putting the finishing touches on it and making sure everything fits and editing and all that. But do you think there's anything to that where summertime is actually reasonable to expect?
I can see with COVID lifted, right? Or not lifted. We're not out of COVID, right? It's still happening. But with everything kind of going back to semi-normal, and I'm using air quotes here, I can see where they may expedite the post-production work on Mando the question is, what do they fill in with at the tail end of the year, right? And so maybe, if it's a combination of expediting that because of COVID restrictions are now loosened up, and they have Andor, for example, that's much further along, then that makes sense. Like they're going to have to need something in the fall or going into the wintertime, whatever time frame they want to hit. So I could see them doing that for that reason. That's a big if, though. I just don't know. It's been pretty quiet. I will say there's been a lot of leaks here recently too on season 3 of The Mandalorian. And
Yeah.
some of them are like, you just kind of blow your mind. And we won't get into those, but that's usually a good indicator that stuff is moving along because they're in post-production and more people are seeing it now, and it's touching a lot of different hands. And so these leaks start to come out. And these are, again, what I would call credible leaks and information from sources that have a history of getting things right. So all that is kind of painting the picture that it could be possible. We'll have to see, though. I'm excited. I'd love to have it in the summertime. But here's the other thing too: summertime is traditionally not a good time for TV shows. You know what I mean?
People
Like,
are gone, ratings are low.
ratings are generally low. People are on vacation. They're traveling. Kids are out of school. So you kind of, with a show this big, I would expect them to try to target the fall. I can see them maybe inching in right before the summer's over, maybe coming in there. So technically it is this summer. But yeah, I'd be curious as to see if they're going to be able to pull that off, though.
Yeah, and I think you were onto something there with it's what else is coming out this year. So if we look at Kenobi will be going through the end of June, right? So we'll just call it by the beginning of July, it's over. And we know we've got Andor, which we'll learn more about at Celebration. We know that Bad Batch is somewhere in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got Mando season 3. So those are our 3 big titles that we expect to have this year. And besides Kenobi. And if you think about it, that's only about 4 or 5 months to get 3 different shows in. And we know that Bad Batch is going to be at least 8 episodes. Andor is probably going to be, I'm going to go with 6 episodes, maybe 8.
6 to 8, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that we've got confirmation on that. And then we know Mando is going to be about 8 episodes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm still kind of banking on Mando maybe end of the year. But I think a lot of that depends on how ready Andor or Bad Batch are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think something like Bad Batch in the earlier fall is probably a little bit safer bet for that type of show, towards that comes out like in an August, September timeframe, after Kenobi is all done.
Right.
But we'll have to see. I mean, it's a however they want to do it. But again, it just depends on where they're at. And Andor, we know so little about. Is it even ready for prime time? Is it even ready for a trailer at this point? We have no idea.
Yeah.
It should be, because it's been in production for long enough, right? So,
Yep.
So is it really? And we'll just have to stay tuned and find out. Celebration will be really telling about what the rest of this year is going to look like, though, I think.
Yeah, I think I've heard some pretty good confirmations that we will get at least a trailer of Andor. We may even get an episode, kind of like they did with Mando. So
Really? Even though we're going to get 2 episodes of Kenobi, huh?
Yep.
Wow.
It's going to be a crazy celebration.
It's going to be, yeah.
A good
That's
one,
cool,
too.
because we were always worried about what was Celebration actually going to throw at us. So
Yeah.
now
We know.
we're starting to get a much better picture of that.
Hey, Jonesy.
Yeah.
So I got a question for you. What
All right.
do Boba Fett, Luke Skywalker, and Tormund Buck of the High Republic all have in common?
Oh my gosh, I know where this is going. What do they have in common, Albert?
They have terrible taste when it comes to undergarments. You know what I'm talking about? They have like the big, bulky, like underwear, sagging diaper type things that you see them wear in the galaxy far, far away.
Right. Yeah. Thankfully, we don't have that problem, though, thanks to MeUndies and their line of soft and comfortable underwear, socks, loungewear, dog hoodies. The good folks over at MeUndies were kind enough to send Albert and I some of the garments to test out and try. And we were blown away. Like, there has been nothing softer and more comfortable than some of the clothes that they had sent us. And we're really excited to bring that to y'all.
Yeah. And okay. So, and again, we got some free wear to kind of test and try out. And Jonesy and I have talked about this, right? We said we only do advertising if it's something that we can get behind, right? And it has to be Star Wars related.
Yeah. Something y'all would actually be interested in.
And I took a trip recently to the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Did I get that right? Out in your neck of the woods, out in Houston, where you're at. And I said, okay, I'm going to put these to the test. So I put socks on, put the underwear on. I put other clothes on too. And I went to the museum and I
Wait, you put them on the outside or the inside?
Yeah, they're all on the inside. Nothing weird going on here. But I wore them for 8 hours. And I remember on the way back, like the socks hadn't fallen, which was a big thing for me because I work out a lot, so that's not true. I don't.
You are a leg man.
I'm a leg guy. But the socks didn't fall down. They were still super cushiony underneath the entire time. And the best part was they took really good care of the twin sons.
I tell you what, though, I have you and I talked about it when we first were approached, and we've not had premium underwear before. And this is something completely unique. And oh my gosh, I'm sold. Like I am hook, line, and sinker sold. That these are some of the most comfortable underwear. And I got to be honest with you, socks. These socks that they sent, I got the ankle cut ones, and they have this little pad around the backside. And for those that know me, I wear a certain pair of shoes I got from Celebration that love to dig into the back of my Achilles tendon and rub the back of my foot, and it hurts sometimes. And these, man, they stayed up right above that. They were super comfortable. They're really thick. It was like a nice warm Wookiee hug around my foot all the time. And I just haven't had socks like these before. And I really enjoy, super premium feeling materials and what they do. And that you were saying it stayed up. These didn't fall, and they just constantly felt like my foot was protected, and I could just keep walking all day long. So it was really nice.
Yeah, I've
to have that kind of support.
Never owned like underwear this nice ever in my life. And there's a reason why they make premium stuff. And don't forget, we've got Mother's Day and Father's Day coming up, which would be a perfect way. But what I'm going to do is pick up some stuff to wear to Celebration. And maybe they're already asking for picks over here in the chat. Maybe we'll do a Patreon like tier or something to see the picks. I'm kidding. But I definitely going to pick some of this stuff up for Celebration.
You've got a screenshot, though, of some of the stuff they've got, right?
Well, yeah, so I pulled this up. So they've got two lines. They love partnering with different types of TV shows and movies. And they've actually done a Star Wars one print before. This just came out, I think, this month, as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken.
A couple weeks ago.
They just came out with these two prints. One's called Lightspeed, and the other one is Rebel Squadron. So Lightspeed is the one here. I think I got a closer look up of it here. We're kind of scrolling through, but you've got pretty much everything that you could possibly throw on a pattern from space. You've got the Falcon, you got the Star Wars logo, you've got the Rebel Alliance symbol, the Imperial symbol, Death Star.
All on a black background.
Yep. Very cool colors. And then they've got this one, which is the Rebel Squadron one. And this one this is like a scene right out of episode 4. Like it's really all on Tatooine. You've got stormtroopers there. You've got the dewbacks.
Yeah. And what lady does not like a dewback on their underwear and on their garments?
I've never owned anything with a dewback on it. And you got Chewie flexing. I don't remember this happening in the movie, but I don't know if you see that there, but he's got his arms up and he's flexing there.
All right. So what's really cool about this is they have something for everybody. So young and old alike, no matter your size. I go from extra small all the way up to 4XL. They have, when you talk about underwear, they have every single type of underwear you could possibly imagine. And again, for both men and women, boys and girls. So there's something out there for everyone. There's different styles as well, as you're just not looking for Star Wars. They have plain ones, but they've got bras, they have shorts, different types of socks, pants, loungewear. I mean, they've got a little bit of everything for everyone. And what's really cool is that with Mandy's reached out to us and to partner up, not only do they have a 100% satisfaction guarantee, but Albert, they're offering our listeners a 15% offer with their first order if they go over to meundies.com/cantina. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. And you get, like I said, it's if you're not satisfied, they'll make it right.
Yep, meundies.com/cantina. Go do it.
Okay, well, let's do this. Let's do our main show, though. Let's get into the rule of 2. Well, let me preface this by kind of giving the background, the context of how this show came about. And I don't remember exactly who I was speaking to, although I mentioned somebody on the show the other day, and last night they called me out. They're like, hey, you talked about me. And I was like, yeah, sorry about that. But there was someone else I was speaking to, and it was a banter, kind of thing. But we were going back and forth on whether or not, the Emperor and this rule of 2 was really like the right way to go. And I've always been of the opinion that I thought it was kind of silly and kind of dumb. I've got problems with it. So I wanted the show to kind of be, let's talk about the foundational pieces of the rule of 2, the history, why it came about, and then get into some of the discussion about, so what happened after the rule of 2 and that 1,000 years that existed between Bane and Palpatine. And then we can maybe do some speculation about going forward. The Sith, in my opinion, will always return to Star Wars, even though they may not have a presence right now.
Right.
We can even speculate on some of that. I've got some ideas around how the Sith could even come back at this point. But I definitely want to talk about some of the things that were laid down more recently in canon about that.
Exactly. And Rise of Skywalker, were they even still truly following Rule of 2 at that point?
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of interesting speculation about where this is going.
So why don't we start at the beginning? And I know I think there's a misconception, and maybe not a misconception. It's probably a bad word, but I think a lot of people, when you think of the rule of two, you think of Darth Bane, right? You think of Darth Bane because he is the one that technically came up with all of this, but it actually started much earlier than that. So Revan is the one that really gets the credit for this. As you guys know, Revan was a light side user. Then he went to the dark side. He went back and forth a few times. And at the end of the day, through that course of switching sides and being light, being dark, he kind of realized that the Sith inherently have a problem because of the Code of Sith, right? Because of what they're following, the creed that they subscribe to, there's going to be a problem because people are always going to be trying to kill each other. And his idea was this rule of two, that the Sith had to get smaller to become more powerful. Now, unfortunately, he passed. Although if he played SWTOR, he came back even more than a few times. But now he's officially gone. And it wasn't until Bane came around, and Bane was the one that found his Sith holocron. And it's through the holocron, through those lessons of listening to Revan, and he suddenly subscribed to his ideology and thought, wow, this is exactly where we need to go. Did you get into, and maybe let's just talk quickly about Bane too, because I know there's the origin of Bane himself he's a very interesting character. And you and I have read these books, and if you've never had a chance, I don't think I have the first one with me.
It's right above me. Path of Destruction.
Oh yeah, Path of Destruction.
Yeah, the reissue. Yeah,
I've got the original one still, my hardback here.
I do too somewhere. I don't know where it is. I have the original rule too.
Yeah, that's this one.
Well, in hardback. Yeah, I've got paper. Yeah,
but if you get a chance, these books are actually really good. I mean, I've really enjoyed. I've read them a number of times, and I think it was more of just kind of refreshing as going through all of this. But yeah, so for Bane himself, he comes from a very, again, troubled background. We've got yet another character in Star Wars who had family issues. Father was abusive, was kind of a drunk, beat him one night, and when he was about 18. He goes to bed, has his dream while he's sleeping that's crushing his father's heart because he's so mad at him. And then when he wakes up, he realizes his father's dead, and his father died because he used the Force while he was asleep to give him a massive heart attack. Now, this doesn't come out till later on. It's through his studying and all that he realizes that he killed his father. But this is kind of like the beginning of it. And his name, I mean, this is like the most saddest thing of all of this, right? Is the fact that his name, what was his name? Desser? I forget now.
Yeah, I can't remember.
That's his real name. Before this all happened, he took on Dessel is his name. Bane was the name that his father gave him because his wife, Dessel's mom, Bane's mom, died during childbirth, and the father blamed him for that and said he was the bane of his existence.
Right.
So again, we have another happy story in Star Wars where
it's all about family.
It's all about family at the end of the day. So yeah, that was, so that's kind of where he got the name, later on. And we'll get into some of this too, because I do want to talk about like the Brotherhood of Darkness as well.
Yeah. They're instrumental in where this is getting shaped. Yeah.
Yeah. So from there, he goes on and ends up joining the Sith. And we're going to skip through some of this stuff because I think I want a lot of the core discussion to kind of be around, the rule of two itself. But eventually he goes and joins like the Sith Empire, moves up through the ranks, starts getting trained. And then around this time, the Sith have finally realized, okay, we just keep killing each other. And there's a Lord Khan. Darth Khan is one of the Sith lords. He's kind of like the ruler. He creates this Brotherhood of Darkness. And the idea, the concept here is, hey, we got to stop killing each other, strengthen numbers, right? We're all better if we all kind of work. They're kind of adopting some of the same philosophies and ideologies of the Jedi around that time, or the Jedi even to this day. And Bane saw this as weakness, right? Like that's, and this goes back to the Revan teachings, right? About, hey, you're stronger having a smaller group than having a large group, and kind of watering down the dark side and watering down the Force. And eventually he ends up killing the Brotherhood of Darkness. In fact, he kills all of the Sith and kills a lot of the Jedi by the end of the first book, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, after the end of the first book, through the thought bomb. I mean, we won't get into that. Basically, it's a Jedi bomb that killed any Force users that were around that area.
Yeah, kind of reminds you of Moment a little bit, huh?
It does. Well, you mentioned Momin. We're going to talk about him in a little bit as well.
I
Okay,
think again,
go ahead.
where he was coming from, where Bane was coming from, is that he sees all of this chaos, and as much as the Sith want to say we have a common goal, we have a common enemy in the Jedi, the Jedi are also very opportunistic, and when they see this chaos, the Jedi were able to step in and they were able to just pick them off as they went, and then just be able to completely weaken the ranks. And at their core, the Sith still wanted power. They still want to rule. They still want to be the one in control, regardless of where they're at on the in the line of command or the scale of power, however you'd like to classify it. And at that core is what Bane and Revan, to an extent, saw was the true core of the problem. And like you said, it's more about culling the weak. That the idea of the rule of two is that says, okay, well, only the strongest will survive, because in order to take the master's place, you have to usurp the master. And there's only one of you. There's only two of you there: one to have the power, one to crave it. And so, but it's very critical though that they finally realized that. But it really took a mass, genocide effectively, for someone who was very, I guess, visionary in a certain sick sense of sorts. But again, he saw what was going. He got tired of the infighting. There was nothing that was going to help them progress. They would make progress, and then the Jedi would come and just pick them off one by one if they weren't doing it themselves. And in the end, you just kind of flounder and you go in the circle. And, Bane had just had enough of it. He's like, I don't understand. I mean, and again, his power was growing so immensely that he could actually do something about it too.
Yeah. And it's at that point that he then adopts this. He creates the official rule of two, kind of seeing Revan's vision through. He takes on an apprentice named Darth Zana. Darth Zana, at some point, and we'll get into some of the, I guess, the lineage here in just a second. Because Darth Zana ends up taking over Bane, then she pulls in her own people, and again, we'll get into all that here in just a little bit here as well. But this goes on, so the Rule of Two goes for about 1,000 years, more give or take, all the way obviously until Palpatine, and I think officially ends with Palpatine. Although we'll reach back on that one as well.
And I hear everybody screaming in the background, but what about all the other apprentices and the video games and the Inquisitors? Don't worry, we'll get there.
Yeah. Some of that is some of that's probably, I wouldn't say retcon, but they've recently have put verbiage in some of the material to kind of explain some of that, so it does make some sense. So again, so we're going to be referencing those books. Also, if you guys are really into this stuff, I think I've talked about this book before, but Jedi versus Sith. Kevin Scott posted a picture of this book this week, as a matter of fact, and he said he'd pulled it out because he was doing some research.
Oh,
so although this is Legends material, the fact is, I mean, these writers and these creators, they do go to this stuff and they do pull ideas from it as well. So
there's always a little truth in Legends.
There are always truth in Legends. Dark Legends, this is the short stories. I pulled some stuff in here because there's an Exegol story in that. That's pretty cool. We've talked about this. If you're really into the book of the Rule of Two, this is the book to have, right? Book of Sith. It's actually got the Rule of Two in here, as well as Palpatine's. There's a Palpatine section in here. There's a Dathomir section, the sisters in there as well, so you can kind of look at that. And then the most recent one was this one, which is Secrets of the Sith. And this one does a pretty good job of keeping it light, but at the same time giving you the high level bullet points of what has happened with the Sith. And this is where I found a lot of updated verbiage that explains a lot of what's happened since Disney's come in and The Rise of Skywalker has come out and premiered, all that. So there is a lot of having a bit material there.
And having a bit of a diary aspect from Palpatine really provides a really interesting perspective on it too, right? Of not only what has he learned, but also more of a dialogue too of the inner workings of how Palpatine viewed the prophecies and viewed what actually was going forward in these myths as well.
Yeah.
And whether or not they were true, but also his application of them and what he was seeking to do. And it provided a lot of context for everything from Darth Tenebris to Plagueis, and of course to Palpatine, and even retroactively back before the Rule of Two and what we expected to see there about where did this actually originate at its true core.
Yeah. So let's go back and first talk about, again, I want to get in the mindset of Bane and Revan and just touch on why, again, the rule of two came about. Aside from the, we talked about the dilution of power. We'll talk more about that here. But at the end of the day, if you look at the Sith code, peace is a lie. There's only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. Okay, so and we've done a whole show on the code of the Sith already. So go back and listen to that one if you want. But in here, inherently, what this does is it does kind of put the Sith at odds with one another, right? They're always seeking that ultimate power, as Palpatine mentioned there at the end of Revenge of the Sith, right? That thirst for ultimate power never goes away, and so to get that power, they're constantly trying to undercut each other and kill off each other. And this was going on forever. So when you go back to like KOTOR and SWOTOR, I mean, there were so many lords and so many dark users, as many as there were Jedi, right? And they were, I mean, even if you played any of those games, especially when you play the dark side, you're constantly killing each other and you have the option to kill them off and you gain power through all of that. So that was just kind of how things were going. That was how they would ascend. But Bane has a very interesting take on the power of the dark side when it's kind of spread out like that. I have the quote here, but he talks about it being like, he says the Force is like venom. All right, it's not fire. And what he means by venom is when you start spreading it out among a number of people, then, and everybody takes that venom, it doesn't really kill them. But if you were to take that venom altogether and give it to like a Kraken dragon, it could kill it, right? That was kind of the analogy that he was given. He didn't believe that the Jedi did, that the Force was like light, like it was fire, and that you could pass this on from one torch to another, and that would it would be equal among everybody. So the first question I have for you, so if you subscribe to Bane's theory that the Force is more concentrated the less people that are using it, right? I don't know that I agree with that, because to me that feels like you're putting the Force is finite. You know what I'm saying? Like there is a definite end because it's going to be diluted with the number of people, right? And I've never perceived the Force to be that way. I've always felt it was endless, boundless in terms of its power, boundless in terms of its availability. But yet this ideology says, hey, we're stronger when there's only two of us, because now you're only splitting this finite amount of Force into two people rather than hundreds, if not thousands. Right. How do you feel about that?
I didn't take the same away from that. How I took Bane's approach to this, and I think we even get a bit of a flavor of this in Rise of Skywalker, is it's this accumulation of knowledge and power. As you call the ranks, and as you continue to grow, and you have one Sith that's stronger than the next, the idea is that you're accumulating all of that over time. So everything that your master has learned before you, if you strike them down, presumably you are only ready to strike them down whenever you have gained everything that they have to give you. And then you take an apprentice and you build up your knowledge, and then the cycle repeats, right? So I think it was more of this idea of, when you think of I am all the Sith, that's the idea behind it, is that, okay, it's less so, again, a more concentrated form of it, I think, by default, because you don't lose a bunch of knowledge and you don't have some weaker person killing off a very strong person because they were distracted doing something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're not watering down the skill pool, or the gene pool, if you will, but it's very much this accumulation, and that you are, as you build through that, you are the embodiment of the Sith from ages past. You aren't just what you've learned from a book. If we think about Luke, right? So if we think about Luke, he's having to learn a lot of this stuff on the fly, right? From the old Jedi texts, from communing with Yoda, communing with Obi-Wan. But he still left a lot to do it on his own. The best way to do that is to, this natural plan of succession, right? And you continue to learn from those before you. And so I viewed it much more in that fashion than it was we just have a higher concentration of the Force itself. Because I think it was more of like, how do you apply the Force, and how do you continue that strength in the Force moving on, and you don't weaken it by letting somebody else water it down with just their mere presence of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see that point. I do. I don't know that I agree with it because there are instances there's historical instances where someone has taken power from another person, and prior to the rule of two. So I mean, maybe that's the differentiating factor here. But there are times when someone was superseded by someone else, and they weren't necessarily more powerful. They could have been more cunning, or maybe just more. Probably cunning's the word. So I don't know if it was, and I know the Sith do believe that, right? You're right. They believe that, hey, if I kill this person, I take their power, and now and so and that was Bane's ideology that by the time we get to Palpatine, and it's been 1,000 years, theoretically, whoever that Sith Lord is should be extremely powerful, right? No one should be able to oppose them because of just that whole lineage and absorption of power. So let me go back to this quote because I was struggling to find it in my notes, and I just found it now. It's actually in this, and it's called "Under the Power of Sith" section. He says, "This is where Bane says the Force is not fire; it cannot be passed from one user's lit torch to another." He goes on to say, "No, the Force is venom. If it is poured into many cups, it loses its potency until it becomes so diluted that it is merely an irritant. Yet pour those cups back into a single vessel, and you will have the power to stop a great dragon's heart." Now, the funny thing about that, I mean, that sounds very cool, very poetic, right?
Mhm.
The funny thing is, when you get this book, and I'm going to hold it up to the screen here, but there's a passage where Luke Skywalker, because the way this book is written is he found the Book of Sith, and then he annotates throughout all of this, and so you can see Luke's writings and markups throughout of it. And there's some really funny stuff in here. But Luke Skywalker says Bane was wrong. The Force is fire. When the Emperor held power, the Jedi were nearly extinguished and the galaxy suffered. I have worked to restore the Jedi Order, and we grow stronger as we pass the flame. Our light spreads. So at least in Luke's mind, he didn't subscribe to this as well. Like he felt like that, and maybe that's where I'm going. It's like I get it. Uh, you know, the dogma of it or the ideology of it, I truly understand. So I understand that, but I don't know if that's in the reality of it, right? And I do want to talk one other thing too, as we're talking about this. Like the Sith itself does feel more like an ideology in the rule of two. You know what I mean? Because going back to when the Sith were trying to kill each other, and I think we kind of skipped over this part, but I want to, the whole reason why things were failing is because they didn't have anything to believe in, right? They didn't have a common purpose. With the Jedi, oh, we're protectors of life, and we can all get behind each other, and we're all, again, strength in numbers. We're all kind of rooting for the same cause here. The or the Sith had none of that. It was all selfish for
Right.
themselves. And so what Bane was introducing here was an ideology, something that they needed to live on beyond them, right? Something larger than their own mere presence, their own life. And if you look historically, many of the Sith that followed Bane throughout the years, until we get to Plagueis, did subscribe to this theory that we are doing this for the Order because we want to make the Order stronger, and so that someday we will have our revenge. It's that dude Plagueis who screwed all of this up because he became very selfish, and suddenly he turned it into, no, I want to be the only one going forward and live forever. And of course, that trickled down into Sidious, and of course we get all the Snoke stuff and all that later on. But that's when it got kind of perverted. So I think it was pretty pure up until that point. But that's a key point to the rule of two, is that this did give them a purpose. It gave them something larger, an ideology to subscribe to. And like we said on this show and in real life, it's hard to kill an ideology.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the idea is, again, you have to really focus what that purpose is. And for the Sith, it's always been power, right? They want to pursue power and they don't want to share it. So where the Jedi's strength is that we want to complement one another, spread, we value our differences. You're good at this, I'm good at that. The Sith don't agree with that at all, because if you have others that are good at this and good at that, you've watered everything down.
Mm-hmm.
There's no focus on it. You lose knowledge inherently because they didn't really document some of this stuff as well, I guess. And again, if you have different perspectives on it, and it's like today, right? You have a lot of different philosophies that go out there, and you're like, okay, well, which one is best to apply? And you have to, debate and assemble it yourself. Whereas at the Sith, it was much easier to just condense it and say, okay, well, if we only have two, then it's much simpler for us to be able to move this forward and to actually, pursue an actual goal, pursue what we actually want to get out of it. Now, power and kill the Jedi seem to be pretty synonymous with one another, and that's about the extent of their scope, I think. But I think for them it worked, at least for the time being, because they can't share anything.
Mm-hmm.
They don't value their differences. They don't value the strength of not only numbers, but the strength of what everyone could bring to the table, and that more global aspect of it, that global picture of it, before you could come together and do something better because you have all of the uniqueness that everyone brings.
Yeah.
But again, it's this idea that you have, you're the only one that can carry it forward, because you don't trust anybody else to do it.
Right.
And you need someone to an extent that you can trust, but only so far with an apprentice, and an apprentice with a master too.
Let's go to there's a question here in the chat from Caleb. Hey, Caleb. He says, does it seem in the later movies, numbers 4 through 9, the Jedi unwillingly adapt the rule of 2? It's an interesting thought.
Well, when you're whittled down, I don't know if you have much choice. But or Caleb, are you talking more around the lines of you have a master and you have an apprentice, and while you don't have a council, you still have this one-on-one type of relationship?
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's more the core ideology, like Albert was saying. It's this idea of, why do you have, that's an apprenticeship in the most truest of fashion, the most purest of forms. You're trying to learn, you're trying to bring them up. At some point, like Obi-Wan said, at some point you want to be brothers, or brother and sisters, or sisters in the Force, rather than competitors, or you're fighting for the title, or you're always looking over your shoulder.
Yeah.
It's very much that you want to be shoulder to shoulder with them, and sharing equal footing. And that's something that Brotherhood is kind of pointing out some of those types of things. And a couple of the other, what was the other one that I read just recently that was
Master
really
and Apprentice?
touching? Yeah, I think that shared a lot of it too. And there was something else I'd read that really talked about the Obi-Wan and Anakin relationship in a different perspective, but maybe it was Brotherhood. But yeah, I think it's that idea. You want to bring them along. It's your perspective of what you're trying to accomplish, even if there's, in its purest form, you're just kind of a master and apprentice in that regard. But when you're whittled down, you have to grow the ranks somehow. But Luke clearly went back trying to reform a council too that said, okay, no, we are better in greater numbers.
Yeah. And Tawan, my boy, coming in with the Rebels reference. So yes, we did see it in Rebels as well. In by all accounts, both canonically and through Legends, Luke did regrow the ranks, right? So he truly does subscribe to strength in numbers, and that the Force is fire and it does need to be passed on, right? There's all these analogies to light and that sort of thing. So that it did happen. I think when we get to the movies, obviously, because of the Purge and Order 66, they're kind of, staffing's a little low, if you will, right? So they had to get more people in there for that. So very good question.
Right. And I know you're going to get to this, but it's really hard not to bring it up.
All right, let's bring it up. What do you got? Pull it off.
All right. So Doctrine of the Dyad.
Oh, I was saving that for the very end, but okay.
I know, but it's so relevant for this, of why the rule of 2 is important, I think.
Yeah.
Because what the Sith are trying to accomplish is trying to identify a way to resurrect the Dyad. Right. And you've probably got what the actual doctrine says at your fingertips. Do you know?
Yeah, I do. I'm pulling it up, but keep talking here.
Sorry. Yeah. So basically, the Doctrine of the Dyad, you want to, so what we saw in Rise of Skywalker is where you have two people who are inherently linked within the Force, and they can do things that can't be done by anyone else. And they can also, presumably, they can heal one another, and presumably that's the conduit to immortality.
Yeah. And the way, so this is one thing that was, again, not retcons. I hate that word. They added to it to
enhance
it to make sense. So what they did is they put this in here because now the way canon has interpreted, the way Luke and the way I think we're going to see this when we get to the book with Lando and Luke on Exegol. Yeah. I think we're going to see more of this because I think this is the future of Star Wars, by the way. So since we're already talking about it, but the rule of 2 now. Yes, it was Bane. Yes, it was Revan. But then thousands of years prior to that, this dyad, Doctrine of the Dyad, actually was kind of like the precursor. It was the template. It was the ultimate power, right? It's still the power of 2 only, but this was a whole nother level. And it was they were trying to through the rule of 2. They were trying to figure out a way to ascend into a dyad, and I do want to come back to that.
Sure.
We'll come back to it because I do want to talk about the future of that and exactly what some of the changes they made with like Palpatine and Plagueis as well in the dyad doctrine and how important that was to them. But all of this rule of two and this whole kind of ideology is kind of coming now, post the Rise of Skywalker, is coming from this doctrine of the dyad. So just keep that in your back pocket. We'll get to that here in a second. Any Jedi can heal, says Ken Grant. You're 100% right, and that's one of the problems I have with this. But more on that later, because that is a touchy subject for me too. Okay, so let's talk about. I had a question in here about the rule of two, going back to whether or not this was successful, right? What is our? I start using these business terms, but what's our success criteria, Jonesy, in order to determine whether or not the rule of two was successful? And I think we can look at it a couple different ways. I think we can look at it from how long did it last? What were the significant victories or events that happened as a result of the rule of two? Again, we're talking about a span of about 980 to 1,000 years total up until Palpatine. But I don't know. That's where it gets really difficult for me, because there really wasn't a lot that was done, right? The point was to go into hiding and work secretly through the shadows in hopes of one day, getting revenge back on the Jedi. So from that regard, I don't know. I guess just kind of give me your thoughts on whether or not you felt this was just generally successful over the course of those 1,000 years.
Yeah, well, in true business form, you have to define success, Albert.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's always in the eye of the beholder. If the idea was to have a Sith empire, then the rule of two completely decimated that one, right? Because they had the Sith empire, they had legions of Sith at one point.
Yeah,
but then you could always argue that the infighting was going to dwindle those ranks anyway. But it had worked for thousands of years, presumably before that, right? Knights of the Old Republic and so on and so forth. They seemed like they were always there, and they'd go into hiding, but they would expand numbers and then they'd come back, right?
All right.
So if you view success in that regard, then rule of two completely broke that. Now, if you review a rule of two of saying, okay, you're accumulating knowledge and accumulating power towards a moment in time where you were able to finally seize it, and you have checked off destroy the Jedi, control the galaxy, then to that extent, rule of two was generally successful from what Palpatine accomplished. The problem was it wasn't very long lasting. So is that another criteria for success where you have to say, okay, well, no, we have to endure this for not 20 or 30 years, but we really need to hang on to this for generations like we had, previously. Mm-hmm. So I think it's one of those ideas of how do you feel while you're doing it? Does that feel like you're on the right path? And then when you've accomplished what you've set to accomplish, how long do you need to hang on to that before it feels like it was all worth it?
Yeah.
And I think to your point, at the end of the day, it didn't seem like it was really all that worth it. If you get 20 to 30 years of Mecca, only to have it all come crashing down, and you're left in a hollow body, and you're creating clones, and
right,
you're getting beat by a Jedi that's held a lightsaber once or twice.
Yeah, and I would agree. So again, going back to what is your success criteria? If it means that a Sith would extinguish a Jedi, then I think that's probably mission accomplished, right? And I do want to touch on one thing and I want to go through the timeline here, because I want to talk about specifically who was around during that 1,000 years and what were some of, I guess, what few significant details we have about it. It's kind of a black space right now.
Right.
But there's something called the Sithari prophecy. And this was, again, this is legends, not canon, but it was something that Bane believed in. And the Sithari prophecy states that a Sith will come about. It was their own prophecy, one of their prophecies, but that a Sith would come and destroy them, right? Destroy the Sith, and that this Sithari would raise the Sith from the death and make them stronger than ever before. And when you talk to Bane, right? You don't talk to Bane, but he truly believed that he was the one. I never really got the sense that it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, he was trying to make this happen. But he felt that was certainly what he did with the thought bomb, right? Because he did kill pretty much all the Sith and brought them back to life. In the same book, and I won't pull it up because I don't have it marked, but in that book of Sith, I think it was in the book of Sith, or it may have been in this one here too. I don't know. Palpatine makes a note, and Palpatine says Bane's a fool. it's actually me. I think it's in this book here. I'm almost positive now.
Yeah, it is.
He says, no, that was me. I'm the one. I was the Sithari prophecy because I have brought the Sith stronger, brought them back stronger than ever before. So I think for both of them, if they're measuring how successful the rule of two has been, I think in both of their minds, it was successful. One of my biggest arguments is that when you look at the grand scheme, the grand scale, the timeline, the galactic timeline from beginning to end, the amount of power that they had, this ultimate power, this true rule of two, is such a small sliver. Because I don't think it's fair to count Bane's time, right? Because Bane, yes, he became powerful. Yes, he got into the rule of two. However, they were, again, hiding in the shadows for 1,000 years. And there was rules of engagement during that time, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, rules of engagement of what they could and couldn't do while they were hiding, because the whole point was they didn't want to expose themselves. They didn't want the Jedi to ever know until the time was right, until, all the planets aligned, no pun intended, so that they could actually go ahead and take back or kill the Jedi. But if you look at Palpatine's rule, he wasn't in power very long either. In fact, so Palpatine lived, not including the decomposed body that we see in The Rise of Skywalker, but from the time that he killed Plagueis to the time that Vader or Anakin threw him into that shaft, that was only 88 years, right, of his total life. And of that 88 years, he only ruled as Emperor Palpatine, as this true, powerful, ultimate being, for only 36 years, which this goes back 24,000 years is when the Sith were set up. Right. It goes back, and now that's not fair because that first 20, so the first 17,000 years of that 24,000 years was really the Sith just kind of coming to be. They didn't have the Sith Empire. The Sith Empire, the Sith Order, came around 7,000 BBY. Okay, so before the Battle of Yavin. Right. So you've got about 7,000 years where these Sith were around, and this is where they were backstabbing. This goes into the KOTOR timeline. This goes into the SWTOR timeline. And then when we finally get to Bane, so Bane was he ruled for, we don't know exactly how old he is. In fact, that's confirmed in the most recent book too. No one really understands. I think Luke even puts a passage in there and says, I don't know how long Bane lived for, but he did live for a pretty long time. But we know he lived for a pretty long time. I would say about 150, 200 years, maybe around there. Yep. So from 1,000 to 980 is when you've got him and Darth Zana. Darth Zana replaces him back in around, well, we don't know, again, 980 plus, somewhere around there. And she takes on Darth Cognis. Okay. And so Darth Cognis then takes on an apprentice named Darth Millennial. And I know it sounds weird. There's actually some history. There's a guy named Abel Pena. I'm going to get off. Sorry, you asked for this, or I asked for this. Abel Pena is a longtime Star Wars writer. He was writing on the Star Wars blogs a long time ago and stuff, but he was going through and naming all of this before. I mean, this is like in the early 2000s. He was naming all these. And so Darth Millennial was named that because at the time we were getting close to 2000. It was a cool term. And so he threw it out there. So there you go. That's the history in it. Now it sounds kind of silly, but there was Darth Millennial. And then we go like radio silent for a while. Like we don't have anybody from about 970, 960 BBY up until about 533. So we've got a 400-year span where maybe they did do things. Maybe they were successful. We just don't know. Right? It's completely silent. We get Darth Gravid and Darth, I'm going to say it's Gene or Gene. I forget how it's pronounced. That's in, 533. And then we flash forward all the way to 185 when we know that Darth Tenebris, his master, was around at that time, but we don't know when he came into power. We just know it was around that time that he was already in power. And this is where we pick up with Darth Tenebris. We get into Darth Tenebris, who takes on Plagueis. Plagueis kills Tenebris. That's what we get at the very beginning of, what is it, the Palpatine book? I've drawn a blank on the name.
Plagueis?
Yeah, Darth Plagueis, that one. So that's the beginning of that. So that takes us to 165 to 67 BBY when Plagueis comes in. And then Sidious comes in around 67 BBY, and he goes all the way to 32 post ABY. So after 32 BBY. So that's kind of the timeline. So again, not a lot in there. And then really, we don't have any kind of historic events. There's no significant things that were done by the Sith during this time. Um, Before I get into the rules of engagement, and it's kind of brief, any thoughts around the timeline? Anything that you want to add to that?
No, not really. But I think it does speak to the shadow of the Sith and how they're always lurking in the behind the scenes and in secret. You don't know what their true agenda is. I think this is why it's difficult to be able to understand what success looks like for them or what it is they're trying to accomplish, because everything takes so much time, and they seem willing to be patient with that. It's one of all things that the Sith have, patience seems to be something they have an abundance of with the right masters. I think there are
Yeah.
clearly a lot of examples who are not patient. Darth Maul was like this, right? He was just, seething for vengeance and blood,
Right.
with what we saw in the prequels, right? So, but what is it that they're trying to do? What do the building blocks look like? Is there a plan? I mean, what is it that they have at a doctrine of sorts that says, okay, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and here's how we're going to get there? And I think this is again where your rule of two might break down a bit, because it's all in the eyes of whoever's in power and in control to be able to say that this is the direction we need to go in. But how much can two people truly accomplish? Now, what we know about Plagueis and Palpatine and even Tenebris is that they were actually able to further a lot of things with research and study, accumulation of wealth, and so that they could do the things that they wanted to do, and manipulate and insert themselves into government and insert themselves into power and manipulating the Jedi. So we know there's a lot of things they're doing, but it's all very it's very unsexy like. So
Right.
it's not like a nice clean pair of comfortable underwear.
No, knock it off. Yeah, it's not like they're breaking out their lightsaber and slashing and hacking and going rising the power or jumping into a fighter and doing it. This is all behind
Exactly.
cooking the books and political type power.
It's a long game. Yeah, and which is always interesting, because as power hungry as they are, you wouldn't expect them to be playing the long game in that kind of way. But
Right.
again, that's where true deception and true power can really truly lie.
You're right, and I think Palpatine was probably one of the more perfect examples of playing the long game. Somebody who had loads and loads of patience, and he was such a scholar. Like, he's so smart. I will give him credit for that and what he did. He made some really dumb moves, but he was so smart in his execution, and having all these different pawns and players, and he was kind of playing outside the bounds of the rule of two in some ways. He was kind of perverting the rule of two, and we'll get to that here. And he was kind of making up his own rules to kind of get to this ultimate power that he eventually got. But I do want to come back to so to your point, lurking in the shadows. All of that is in this, by the way. In this book, there's a whole section in the Book of Sith by Bane where he talks about here's what we need to do in order to become powerful, and it gets into like some of the political stuff and all of that. So the roadmap was there, laid down by him, and people like Plagueis and Sidious really took it to heart and benefited from it. But as they were in the shadows, the whole thing that all they were trying to do was really plot and plan this entire time. And if anybody ever found out that the Sith existed, then Bane's orders were to kill them. So if there was ever a mention that, oh yeah, the Sith I know the Sith are out there, I think I ran into a Sith, it was like, get rid of them, kill them immediately, right?
And their power comes from their secrecy, right?
Exactly. There could never be any mention of them ever, because it could lead to somebody going, maybe I should look into this, right? So,
well, the last thing they wanted was a Jedi hunt.
Exactly, right. Yeah, because they knew at this point too there weren't many of them. So now the galaxy is a pretty large place. These guys were proverbial needles in the haystack. But still, they didn't want that on their backs, right? They were to use subterfuge and misdirection when necessary. So if things came to, they were supposed to cause distractions and whatever they could do. I mean, and again, there's a whole section on this as well. There was a explicit rule that said do not build palaces, right? So they were supposed to live kind of in these menial type areas, right? They weren't supposed to go live in these glorious palaces or take over overlords or anything like that, and raise flags or any stuff. Again, going back to that secrecy.
Yeah, Plagueis and Palpatine did not subscribe to that one.
No, not at all. Hey, let's build a big palace right on Mustafar. Hey, let's do it on
Let's get
Coruscant.
super rich and show everyone how powerful we are.
Yeah. And then the way they went about this was they weren't really. I mean, if it came to killing people, that was their duty. But for any time they could leverage spies, scholars, assassins, trainers, guards, and thieves, that's who they would work through. Like they really weren't supposed to do anything unless they absolutely had to, but they would work through those folks, and they were supposed to throw them a lot of money, like lots and lots of coins, currency to cover it up, so that no one could, there wouldn't be a trail, kind of thing.
I think Palpatine and Dooku did that in spades.
Oh
for
yeah,
the most part.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
We've got prime examples in the Clone Wars where this constantly happened. Everything from, Ventress to what was the bounty hunter that was hired to kill Padme?
Ochi.
No,
I mean,
not,
there's Ochi of Bastoon, but I mean,
yeah, no, I know who you're talking about.
Oh, Zam Wessel.
Zam
and
Wessel,
Jango.
yeah,
Yeah.
Jango Fett, right? They were working through all of these folks. So that's kind of how. That's the timeline. That's kind of what the rules of engagement were. Again, if we're measuring success based on that, I don't know that they were really successful. Maybe in that 400 years, they did something cool. I think we would know about it, but we don't. Okay, so how about we move into then the, I guess some of the pros and cons, and then we can segue into Palpatine's adoption and what he ended up doing with the Rule of Two. And I think one of the things that probably stands out for one of the pros and cons is that you can only have one apprentice, technically by the rule of Rule of Two. But then when we get into Palpatine, he tends to have lots of minions. Is the term that I think he uses in one of those books, really. And there's a lot of examples, right? We've got Darth Maul, Darth Tyrannus. And we get back into Legends, we've got Mara Jade. He was trying to bring Luke Skywalker in when he still had Anakin there. He was trying to tempt Ezra at one point. Maul was trying to tempt Ezra at one point. Quinlan Voss was converted in Dark Disciple.
Right.
Anakin is another one. So he was he kind of broke that rule, right? He did break the Rule of Two on some levels by allowing to have more than one apprentice. And Bane, in the book, in the Rule of Two itself, he actually goes into why you should not take, outside of the power and everything that we discussed, but his reasoning for never having, and he was very, very firm about this, never having more than one. You can have minions, and they can do your dirty work, but you can't train them to be Sith Lords, right? You can't train them in all the secrets, because if you do, you're going to have instances where they're going to buddy up and take you down. Right. That was his fear. So, and we saw this. You think about, I was just thinking right now, Clone Wars, Savage Opress, and Darth Maul. Yeah. I mean, they got together. I mean, technically, those weren't his apprentices, but they were two people that had been trained. Opress had been trained by Tyrannus, and you had Maul trained by Palpatine, and suddenly they were pairing up trying to take down Sidious for reasons other than, ultimate power at that point. You
have become a rival.
Yeah, exactly. But that was kind of the reason. And we'll get into Tyrannus and all that, but I don't know. How do you feel about him breaking that rule? Or do you think it is, or is he kind of walking a fine line?
Well, I think there's two things. One is the apprentices seem to break it more often than the master, I think, because they're always looking at a perspective. And I think Maul was a good example of this in the Maul comic book that we got that was around the time of Phantom Menace. And he goes and kills his first Jedi. He makes a comment in there about that she would make a good apprentice. Mm-hmm. But no, that's not how this works. Only two there are, right? Mm-hmm. But I think when you look at the perspective of someone like Palpatine, it's about having the strongest apprentice you can have. So if you find someone stronger, then you are almost compelled to have them to replace what you have, right? So that was the idea with Luke over Darth Vader or Anakin, right? Because he's younger, he's not broken, and maybe he can do these other things with him. I think it was also with Dooku, right? So with Dooku had a lot of skill, a lot of power, a lot of influence, but at the same time, he knew that there were more powerful beings than Dooku was, and it was a tool to get him to the next step. And so I think that's the other aspect of it, is that you don't train them. I think this is where the Inquisitors get a little bit of a gray space a bit, but you don't train them necessarily. But if you find someone that's worthy, you have to bring them in, because that's the whole idea of the Rule of Two. Is the idea is to make the Sith stronger by a very strong master and an apprentice that can one day eclipse them. And if you feel like the one that you have isn't going to accomplish that, then you're wasting your time. And I think that was something that Bane really subscribed to, is that because I think he felt this way about Xana, right? You know, Xana wasn't showing a lot of initiative as you get towards the end of these books. That he was like, I don't think she's got it in her to kill me, you know, and that she's just not going to have. She's just not that type of thing. So he had to start thinking about otherwise. Now Xana was very clever and was working in the background and ended up doing her master proud, I guess, in the end. But is that same idea though? Is that if you doubt your apprentice, you have to do something else because you can't go on like that and waste time. And I think that's the one thing that we've seen with Palpatine, you know, specifically because we spent the most time with him, is that the Sith don't waste time with certain individuals if there's no longer term value of them. And very much to your point, they will get their usefulness out of them and then they'll cast them aside and get to the next thing that they need to focus on.
I was just, excuse me, I found the passage where he's actually talking about this in the Book of Sith, where he's talking about, he says, any master who instructs more than one apprentice in the ways of the dark side is a fool. This is Bane. In time, the apprentices will unite their strength and overthrow the master. It is inevitable, axiomatic. That is why each master must only have one student. And he goes on to talk about how through the rule of two, we're culling out the weak from our order. But
Right.
it does allow for minions. Again, it's his term. He does acknowledge that, yeah, we can't do everything on our own, and we do need to keep people that are loyal to us at our disposal. But they are.
But does he talk about force sensitive minions, or is he just, this is more like assassins and bounty hunters and
More like
those
assassins
things?
and bounty hunters, yeah. And I
Right.
think this is, no, you're making a good point, because I think this is where Palpatine and Plagueis really started kind of diverting from that. Like, we have no reason to believe that up until Plagueis or even Tenebris, like Tenebris didn't have. Well, no, hold on, he did. Tenebris was probably the first one, because I think he had somebody that he was orchestrating with Plagueis at the time, right? When they were both, if I'm not mistaken, when they were both still young. So it probably started with Tenebris, but prior to that, it does feel like they were people stuck to this rule of two. The Inquisitors, yeah, I get they're dark side users, and yes, they were trained with lightsabers. In my head, they still didn't have all of the bells and whistles. Like, they didn't know how to do some of the more powerful things that Sith, and that's why I feel like the Jedi are always, although the Jedi, they were charged with going and killing the Jedi, they did it in numbers, but like usually one-on-one, many of the Jedi were able to kind of best them in hand-to-hand combat, right, and use of the Force. So from that regard, I don't know that they were really, I wouldn't consider them to be.
Yeah, they were a blunt instrument, right? They weren't the skilled, you know, person wielding an expert blade, or like they weren't like a Vader or a Palpatine going out there and actually doing the true work. They were just out there hitting people over the head and chasing them around. When Palpatine told Vader to train people, it wasn't to make them apprentices. It was very much they need to go out there and they needed to do their job, but they are not part of our order at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them didn't understand that, though. And again, I think that's where you start flirting with disaster a little bit. And I think that's where Bane, you know, saw that too. If you start to bring someone in who does have ability and you start to give them some knowledge, will they then get ambitious enough in order to start pursuing their own agenda and become a threat to you if you underestimate them or if you misjudge them as to how powerful they could actually become? Because I mean, we've seen this before too, where some apprentices become stronger than was expected.
Yep. I was trying to find, there's a cool comment in here from Palpatine himself, where it kind of speaks to the way he looks upon these minions. And like, I think Bane, and I'm not a Bane apologist, don't get me wrong, but he definitely, in my opinion, he did look at these minions, these assassins, as not equals, but that definitely means to an end, certainly tools that he would need to use. But Palpatine's approach to all of this is very sick. Like, he even like in the quote I was looking for was, it wasn't even just the minions. Like, he was talking about Sidious, or I'm sorry, he was talking about Tyrannus, Dooku, Maul. These guys were expendable. They were fools. I mean, he looked down at them horribly. And that's why, and we see this in Revenge of the Sith, like he turned on Dooku, in an instant. Now, I don't know if he had a choice, given that Anakin had 2 lightsabers to his neck, but at the same time, he was just, I mean, that's why you saw it on Dooku's face. Like, what do you mean? Wait a minute. What about all the good times we had, bro? What are you doing here?
Right.
And that's how he looked at it. So they had very different views about the worth of these folks and how expendable they were. In Palpatine's eyes, it was just a matter of going and finding another one. It was no big deal. Like, I'll just keep running these guys into the ground until they're literally dead. So
I mean,
very different approach there.
You work with what you have at the time, right? And a guy like Dooku was, again, he had a bunch of check boxes in the right places. But again, is that someone that you can rule the galaxy with, or feel like you are really furthering that agenda? I guess in the medium term, maybe short term, yeah, but
Yeah.
long term, not really what you're looking for. Because again, Palpatine is really looking for someone to feed on effectively, because that's the only way that he grows power is by effectively growing that from others. He has really no intention of sharing power.
Right.
Right. So the rule of 2 with Palpatine is a tool, when the reality is he's probably trying to move closer to a rule of 1.
Yeah. Which there was a rule of 1 in Legends.
Yeah.
But it's outside the scope of what we're talking about here.
Right. But I think that's actually where we started going towards in Rise of Skywalker. I think in particular.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. This is where the whole eternal life came from, and knowing that there were Sith a long time ago that were able to transfer their life essence, to other bodies and live forever. I forget who it was. It was Lord Adadu. Was that his name? And this is like 20, 25, 26,000 years. Okay. Anyways, I think he was the first one.
Around then.
I think he was one of the first that did that. And then we had Momin, who was able to transfer his life essence into a physical object. So the science was there, I guess, if you will, right? It had been proven to some level. And just the thought of that was intoxicating for somebody like Palpatine and Plagueis, and that's where we got. Now,
But
Palpatine,
again, but Bane's comments are all very much focused on the master, though.
Yeah.
Not the apprentice. Right. So the apprentice has a bit more flexibility, right? Because if they're going to overtake the master, they need to have someone worthy of an apprentice as well.
Yeah.
So that they're out there flirting with the world and evaluating, and when they feel they're ready, that they have someone to step in with them is not, I don't think is a violation of the rule of 2. And in some ways, I think people have done that. The rule of 2 was very much a master's type of rule.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Big Boss.
Big Boss confirming for me that Darth Adadu was the first one. Boom. Chalk one up for me. But here, so the thing about Palpatine, he had his hands in all these like apprentices, right? But what he was doing was he was allowing, like, he provided that template for others. Because if you think about it, you had like Darth Tyrannus. We talked about Ventress. He took on Savage Opress, and we can't forget about Pong Krell, because Pong Krell had already been talking to him, and I don't know if
he was trying to impress Dooku. I don't know if Dooku ever really gave him a whole lot of assurance.
Yeah, I don't. It doesn't. I don't know. We didn't get that from the Clone Wars. In my headcanon, he had done enough to get Pong Krell to turn and join sides, and I think he was on the path of becoming an apprentice of Dooku at some point.
Okay.
Again, that's just me though. That's pure
that would make
conjecture.
sense that there would be some sort of carrot to dangle.
Right.
Say, well, here's what you need to do if you truly want to serve me.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
Although I will say that Pong Krell was coming from a place of, hey, this is crazy, right? The what we're doing here, and we've lost our way, kind of thing. And to some levels, he probably wasn't wrong. But okay, enough of Pong Krell. The point was, he was creating this template for other apprentices or other dark side users, force users, to suddenly go, hey, I want to get on this, right? So they were starting to break away from that true only 2 Sith for a number of years, especially during the Clone Wars. Now, all of this served Palpatine's purpose in the end, which was probably by design. But the more interesting one that I want to talk about is Vader and Luke, because Vader in Empire Strikes Back suddenly, like you mentioned, is dipping his toe into the, hey, let's rule the galaxy together, right? There's no escape. Don't make me destroy you. You don't realize your importance. You have only begun to discover your power. Join me and I will complete your training. With our combined strength, we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy, right? That whole line is him evoking, it's in some level, in my opinion, the rule of two, right? He's saying, come join me, together we can rule. But it's a very different take on the rule of two, because if you think about it, well, I don't know. I guess this is the question for you and for anybody listening and with us live. Was that coming from a place of love? Is it too soon to think that there was an inkling in Vader at that point that he was saying, let's join as father and son, and that he meant father and son in this kind of I'm never going to kill you because you're my son, and you'll never kill me because I'm your father. And that's not the rule of two, but yet we are ruling as two. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense.
What do you think?
No, it was not out of love. Oh, you want me to expound on that? You make fun of me because I didn't say no last week.
Now I do. I want you to expand on that now.
Okay, so Vader, oh man, there's so much context with Vader that it's hard to squeeze in there, and we keep getting more from the comic books, I think, in particular. Yeah,
right. Yeah.
I hate bringing up the comics, but I mean, guys, that's where all of this stuff is really getting really fleshed out. Vader is put through the ringer, and I think we all pretty much assumed that was the case with Palpatine. He's very manipulative. He's kind of a jackass, and just punishes Vader any chance he gets, any kind of disappointment he has. And we could argue that Palpatine's probably been disappointed in Vader since Mustafar, right?
Yeah.
But I think with Vader, it was his one moment where he was like, there's a way out. There's a way out from this repression, this oppression, and just this nightmare that he has with everything that Sidious or Palpatine, whatever you'd like to call him, has put him through over the last 25 years. And so that he would reach out to his son, who, again, he has a inherent connection with, even if just through bloodline at this point, to where he could say, okay, well, this is, I think to your point, this is someone I can probably trust to not kill me right away. I don't know that he had a plan as to how he would actually train Luke or what he would do with him. But I think it was very much more of a self-centered aspect of, this is my way out from under Palpatine. And Luke is probably the best way of doing that. And he sees the promise in Luke, of course, too. And him and Palpatine have spoken about that the power of the Skywalker bloodline in particular is what Palpatine really wants anyway. And of course, that's what we get in the sequel trilogies too, right? Mm-hmm. That's really the combination of the bloodlines is what he's really after, to try to recreate the dyad artificially. But so no, I don't think it was Vader trying to do it out of love at all. I think it was very much that's his best opportunity to get out from under Palpatine.
Okay. I would say I don't disagree that is a factor, but there is a part of me that does believe that there was something there. Like, that to me was the first chink in the armor for Vader, because just the idea of putting himself out there like that. And yes, you could say he was manipulating him and trying to play to Luke's feelings, right? Hey, you've never had a dad, and I'm here now, and I want to be with you. And you know what I mean? Like, I can see where he may be playing into that.
You call me dead, I'll call you son.
You do that pretty good. So I can see where part of it is that, but I do kind of feel like there was something there. Like, that was him. And I think because like you think about after that event, right? And you get them talking to each other through the Force. And I know they change this with a special edition to some extent, right? They changed a little bit of it. But when they're sitting there and he says, son, Luke. And he's like, yeah, Luke. And he's like, father, you're whatever the lines are.
Join me.
That moment, like, it does feel like, holy cow, they've connected. And there was like, this is really awkward now, because it was more than just, I wanted to kill you. You don't want to kill me. You want me to join you. And oh, by the way, you just dropped this bombshell that you're my dad. I just don't know that he could have not said that. I mean, again, unless he was just trying to manipulate his feelings, but I don't know. I guess in my hearts of hearts, I feel like there was maybe something there, at least the beginning of it. And that's where Vader, and I think Palpatine picked up on that. I think Palpatine realized, okay, you're getting a little too close to this kid, right? This is starting to feel a little uncomfortable. And it's starting to feel more than just, manipulation. I think he was starting to sense that. And I think he was worried that this, emotionally emotionally connected Anakin Skywalker was suddenly resurfacing, right? Being resurrected, if you will, because we all know, I mean, he knows where that led to. This is how he got into this mess, was because of his emotions. And he was really thought that through the process of being a horrible person to him through the course of those 25 years, that he had killed that person. And Luke is the one that rekindled that fire for him. So that's my thought. But
Right, and not to make it all about Vader, but I mean
it is about Vader.
well,
All
I
nine,
mean,
all nine
at its
movies.
core, right? But I mean, it's still the so maybe we can agree on this part. I think initially it's Vader's self-centeredness and this desire to reconnect with something from his past and to rekindle that, that positive thing. So redeeming himself in some way. But again, I think it's very self-centered in that regard.
Yes. Yes.
And it's not until later on, I think, that it really matures and really comes out a bit more in Jedi. And I agree with you. I think Palpatine recognizing this in his apprentice, and this is where he's like, okay, I need to make contingency plans. You will bring Skywalker before me, and I will break him.
Mm-hmm.
And then he will break you. Right. And this is the sickness of Palpatine.
Yep.
Son, kill your father to take his place by my side, because you are the next strongest person after me now in the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And again, which plays right back into culling the weak, and you find someone stronger, you get them to take your place. Their ambition, of course, is what he kept, trying to appeal to, or really not his ambition, but his anger and his desire to fix everything, stop this conflict. And Vader was doing a lot of the same things. But yeah, I think you've got to. Yeah, no, I don't believe Vader was thinking much more than beyond himself in a variety of ways when he first made that offer.
Yeah. So let's, I guess we'll kind of end on this last subject here. You've got now, we're in the timeline where we're on the Death Star, the second Death Star, and, Vader picks up Palpatine, or I should say Anakin picks up Palpatine, throws him over into the shaft,
Right.
and he's dead. Until The Rise of Skywalker came out, the rule of two was over. Okay. Like that was, and it was, we've got books in here that they've now gone back and updated that say otherwise, but that was the end of the rule of two. And so the question then, in my mind, at least until The Rise of Skywalker came back, is okay, well, you can't really have Star Wars without the Sith, right? You can't have Star Wars at least without the dark side, at a minimum. How do we get the dark side back? Like, how do we get the Sith to come back? When we get into The Rise of Skywalker, we now know that there was, again, the dyad in the Force, this doctrine of the dyad that stated that, true power, true ultimate power came by way of this dyad that only happens once in generations, eons. It's been eons since this has ever happened before. And so Plagueis knew about this. And so, again, as kind of updated context, Plagueis actually tried to artificially create a dyad with Sidious. It failed. It was not successful. We also know that Sidious tried to do this with Anakin, with Darth Vader. He tried to create this dyad.
Did he actually do it, or he just intended to?
Now, I think he actually did it. I don't know. It was obviously not successful. But he has failed attempts. And it's in this Secrets of the Sith book. He says,
and that would make sense that he would probably blame Vader for that too.
Yes. And in fact, that's what he says.
It makes Luke all the more attractive at that point too. Yeah.
It's exactly what he says. I don't remember the context, but yeah, it's something along the lines of like, he obviously is now, it's very clear that he's not and even he uses the words that I even tried it with, quote, the chosen one, and it was not successful. So that tells me that he's not of the quality that I need, right? I'm paraphrasing, but that's exactly what he does in the past. So he's putting Vader down in that at that point. So,
and that's by Palpatine effect. I think in that same context, I think he also put it that he was starting to doubt whether it was even possible.
Yeah.
If you can't do it with the chosen one, you can't do it with the most powerful Sith ever.
Right. But he said the bloodlines. He said, if you can't do it between the Palpatines and the Skywalkers, then what's the point?
Of course, he's a Palpatine of one bloodline, as far as we know at that point. So how would he be the most powerful bloodline? But maybe we're missing some context there.
I think
his parents are.
It's probably him just like chest pounding. I mean, I don't know.
Oh, I bet.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's the emperor, right, of the galaxy. So of course he's strong.
The one true emperor.
Yep. And then ironically, I guess you could argue that it was through the Palpatines, it was through the bloodline of the Palpatines and the Skywalkers that the Dyad did come about. It just wasn't Vader
It was a
and
different
Palpatine.
generation.
Yeah, a whole nother generation. And so, so I think from that perspective, obviously the rule of two, I think officially did end. Luke thinks so in Legends. He writes in the book. I think it was in Jedi versus Sith. I think it's in this book here that he mentions that, or maybe it was in the Book of Sith. One of the two. He does mention that the rule of two is over. It was foolhardy. Should never have gone through. It was short. He goes and talks about how dumb it was, I guess, just in some ways. But I guess the question that I want to end with is really about looking forward now. Post Rise of Skywalker, we've still got a presence maybe on Exegol. I don't know. Exegol was pretty blown up there by the end of it. But if you had to, let's get into speculation, right? If we were going to bring back the rule of two, and knowing what we know about the dyad and how that was now finally seen again. And by the way, I should mention this also. On Exegol, the doctrine of the dyad is on one of the walls. Right. And I think when we get to that Luke and Lando book, I think we're probably going to get a mention of them going and seeing it. And that way it ties it back to Rise of Skywalker. But it does feel like that's where the Sith were headed, at least from Palpatine's perspective. That's where they're headed. Now, again, it was perverse because it was more about how do I preserve my own life rather than the integrity or the ideology of the Sith. And that's very different. But that's kind of where they were going. And so there was a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of effort that was put in by the what are they called now? I forget. I'm drawing a blank on the name.
The Acolytes.
So it was the Acolytes, but the Acolytes were there, but they were not the Sith users or the dark side users. Keep going. I'll pull up the name here. But give me your thoughts on, I guess, speculating on the future of the Sith and the rule of two. Is it something that we'll see again? And is it the same? Does it look different?
Yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind. One is if you have Jedi, you always have the potential for having Sith, I think. And then the other part of it is doctrines truly never die. A doctrine is an ideology. It's a way of thinking. You have physical context now. You have Jedi context overlapping the Sith, which of course spur further ideas and further debate and further interpretation. And I think as the Jedi Order rebuilds and regrows, just like we have with what we presumably will see, and with High Republic at some point, is that that darkness is always still there, right? The dark side never goes away. It might be repressed for a while, or you might have balance, or how you want to equate that, but at some point, someone gets a bit ambitious. And this is because I'm going to use the word people quite liberally here, but people are people. And people are all going to have come from a different walk of life. And when you expand the Jedi Order to include a bunch of different people, especially if you're getting them as an older age, then you start to inherit some potential issues with the Sith coming back, because again, you're more prevalent to being susceptible to the dark side in some way. And again, we've seen this in past material, right? The Bogan collection, we saw this with what was the Monster of Temple Peak, or her friend, gosh, I'm trying to blank on what her name is now too.
Ty York.
Oh yeah, Ty York, with her friend and his infatuation with learning all of this,
and becoming possessed.
Right, yeah, the secrets that you shouldn't know, right? And but again, that's how people get curious and people get imbued. And I think that's the thing with Siths. There's a bit of sorcery to it all. And I know it's a bit of irony of that, because Obi-Wan's been called a wizard, but there's a bit of sorcery to it. And we've seen this with the Dathomiri witches as well. That there's this weird connection with the dark side, and it can be imbued in a lot of different ways, and not only in a possession way, but just a sheer desire and pursuit of it all. So what'd you find in your
it was the Sith Eternal is the name of that group.
Oh, the Sith Eternal. Yeah, the Eternal. Right.
Yeah. And it's you mentioned the Acolytes of the Beyond. Those are the ones that were in the Aftermath trilogy, that were kind of doing some of the legwork. This one's a really difficult question to answer about whether or not we get the rule of two, because I don't know that they'll be in a position to get into the rule of two out of the gate. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know how you avoid the rule of two, actually.
Yeah, because at one point you can have one, and you get another one.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happens after that? Do they stop? Do they grow?
Well, it comes back to, do you rely on secrecy in the shadows to build? I mean, you kind of see why that's so important, right? And how you
Mhm.
can get locked into a rule of two effectively right off the bat.
So here I got a question for you. It's a loaded question, but would you like to see, if let's say we get more Sith, and let's fast forward. I'm going to pull an arbitrary number out here. Let's fast forward 100 years post the rise of Skywalker, and the Sith are, quote, back. What does that look like? Does it look like the rule of two, and they're conniving and hiding in the shadows? Are we going to go into 1,000 more years of secrecy before anything really happens? Or would you rather see something like a renaissance of sorts, where the Sith are going back to the older ways of, hey, let's recruit everybody, let's turn everybody, and it's, let's fight fire with fire, strength in numbers kind of thing. Maybe not the Brotherhood, because that was a little kind of soft in my opinion, but
Right.
more to that ruthless, we're all stronger together because we kill each other, I guess. I don't know, but you know what I'm
I
saying?
think right. So I think it takes a significant shift in that. So you need a catalyst that says, okay, and I think this really stems from the Jedi. The Jedi do something that is heinous, and it really creates a rift. And I think when you create that rift, that's when you break off. Maybe it's a small sect, maybe it is only a couple of people at one point, but you grow that ideology, and that ideology isn't necessarily being evil and taking over the galaxy, but it's inherent in embracing the things that the Jedi still at least perceive to want to ignore or to sacrifice, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So I think it creates, you have to really do create a new ideology, because I think if you look back, you're like, okay, well, the rule of two kind of didn't work. The Brotherhood was a disaster. The rule of one didn't really work for Palpatine, because, well, if you're gone, everybody's gone. So, I mean, it's like, what do you do? And I think you almost have to have this renaissance, as you said, of a new way and a new approach, this new Sith Empire type of thing rising, where you have a very different set of values than what you had, that maybe aren't rooted in taking over the galaxy, but they're very much in embracing passion and not limiting themselves to what the Jedi have restricted themselves to for generations and millennia at this point.
Yeah.
So I think that's the core thing that would have to shift, and I think that's where it would go. So I have a feeling you're probably somewhat of that same ballpark, that you have to have a core shift away from these things that haven't worked for very long, or at least the rewards you got from them are very limited, if you really want to truly grow it. But I think you still need leadership. You need almost like a council, a small council of, Sith that help lead, and they keep things a bit under control. But
Right.
can you really control the Sith after some amount of time? Or do you end up with the Brotherhood again?
Yeah. So here are my thoughts on it. So I think there's three ways that the rule of two could come back, or at least the Sith could come back, but specifically the rule of two. One is what you mentioned, the schism, right, in the Jedi Order. Something happens, things go really horribly wrong. There's a big breakup. They don't call each other for years, and I wonder if that's going to happen.
Like what we're going to have in High Republic.
Well, that's where I was going. Yeah, it's like
with Dalna. Yeah.
That's where it feels like it's going within the High Republic. Like something, they're going to probably do some things, and people are going to get upset, and
Right.
it's going to cause the rise of the Sith at that point. Okay, which we no, never mind. Okay, so that's one way, right? The schism, right? Two, on Exegol, when they left Exegol, right? It was difficult to get there. So I don't know that they can successfully get there again after, with Luke gone and Kylo Ren gone, the Emperor gone. Maybe Rey has a way to navigate through all of that and get back to it. But I think if they're going to rise, it's going to have to be on Exegol. I can't see anywhere at least in that timeline, either in the core in the core territories planets or in the Outer Rim. I don't understand where they would be able to suddenly spring up and become a powerful force again. So to me, it makes sense that in Exegol is where they're probably going to have to rebuild, or even further out. I don't know. It could be even further somewhere else, right?
It's one of those things that, like, beneath the ash is the most fertile of ground.
Oh, I like that.
I mean, that's why they like to say, from the ashes, things will rise. And
right.
It's very true, because again, it's all still there.
It's all still there. Exactly.
It just needs time to recover.
And we don't know. And here, the other unknown factor before I get in the third one here, or the second and third one, the other unknown factor is we don't know what Luke was doing outside of going around and collecting all of these relics. We know Palpatine was collecting the relics when he was in power. He was trying to put these away, and he stored them away in different vaults. And that was part of what Luke was trying to do, was kind of figure out where all this was, because some of these artifacts are very, very powerful. So we don't know the state of relics and knowledge and all that, right? So let's just presumably somebody said, I want to be a dark side user. Okay, so where do they go for their learning and training? Do they just make it up, or do they have to go figure out and try to find these Palpatine collections, or even these Luke collections now, right? I don't think Luke is one that would go and destroy all of this stuff, but I feel like he would lock it up and make sure it was pretty darn safe. But
he called it the Grogu collection instead of the Bogan
right.
collection.
Yeah, the Grogu collection. Okay, so that aside, I think another way the rule of two could come about is if they were to successfully find a way to create a dyad, maybe not as powerful, but if they did all this, they were doing all this research and they were trying to get towards this, following the doctrine of the dyad, and maybe they have a way that they do this. And so there's, 100 years after the rise of Skywalker, there's been all these secret experiments going on, and they were able to kind of figure this out. That would be one way. And that would be even a minor version of the dyad would be pretty powerful, given what they can do, right? Being able to,
like Tarek and Sarek.
Yeah, I mean, they had a force bond, but dyad,
it flirts a little bit with dyad.
The dyad, the characteristics,
passing through space and time.
Yes, that's the one,
the extra part.
Yes, that's the one that's a little bit extra, and I don't know that I know Tarek and Sarek don't do that, but that's where I think that's kind of like that line, right? You cross that barrier, and I think the life. I know Ken was talking about healing. When you look at the book, it says that the dyad's able to heal. I truly believe that healing has always been there, but I subscribe to the old 1987 role-playing game where that was a thing.
Well, and we have Grogu who's able to do it, so.
True, yeah. So I don't know that it's specifically a dyad trait. Now, I think it's a very difficult force power to use, and you've got to have, you got to you meet certain criteria in order to do that. But, and so there's other things in there about what the dyad is. So I think if they had an ability to create a lesser dyad, or even if the dyad itself, that would be a way to get the rule of two back. And I say rule of two because really at that point it would be the dyad.
However, literally a rule of two.
It would be a rule of two. However, that's so powerful. Like now you think about it. Well, who's going to contend that? Right? Is it Rey? Is it who's going to be the counterbalance to that? Who's going to bring balance to the Force now that you got this dyad that's Sith based, if you will? So. Okay,
well, and let's think about the legacy of twins in Star Wars, right?
Yep.
I mean, Luke and Leia, I mean, the emphasis on twins, and we even had this in Visions, right? Kare and, what was Kare's sister's name?
Oh, in Visions? Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about the one where Neil Patrick Harris and
yes,
he was the voice. I
can't remember. But I mean, again, it's the idea of twins, because that's about and that's why I brought Tarek and Sarek, because twins have an already inherent uniqueness to them, especially in Star Wars with how we've equated them. And so when you look at the likelihood of two people to create a dyad artificially, that seems to be the most natural way of doing it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Jaina and Jason, there you go. So let's bring back Legends, yeah. So, but I think that's the one way you could probably do it. So do you have a rise of twins that actually both adhere to what, like we did in Visions, but they actually both pursue that and want to try to force a dyad. And I think that might be the way to make that actually somewhat successful, at least on some level, because they're part of the way there already.
Yeah. And I say create one because he was going down this path, like something about his studying, something about the Sith internal studies and experiments led them to believe that you could theoretically, hypothetically create a dyad, right? An artificial.
Do you really believe that, or do you think it was just their interpretation of everything? They just think they can do anything if they just work hard enough and they're strong enough and more powerful enough.
I think I believe it as a plot mecanism to bring back the rule of two. Beyond that, that's probably it.
We've
jumped
used far less things to create plot points.
Exactly. So again,
and so I have the movies.
I'm just an idea guy, man. I'm just trying to give you ways out. Okay.
Right. There you go.
And so the one that here's the one that's probably more intriguing to me is if you're going to have the rule of two exist, then you got to have, to me, it feels like you got to have somebody out of the gate that's going to be pretty powerful. So let's say it's not a schism. It's not the dyad that's maybe too powerful. But what if you had somebody like Momin? Okay, because we know that Momin is out there. He's a dark Sith Lord who transferred his life force into a helmet. We have a prime, concrete, material example of where someone put the helmet on and he was able to possess that person's body. He is somebody that is extremely powerful, could suddenly be back in the limelight, if you will, right? Suddenly be restored to power.
To the point of resurrecting himself.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And so
He
now
actually
you have somebody
resurrected.
you have somebody like a Bane or a Sidious or whatever, somebody that's really, really powerful that can kind of just step right in and reestablish the rule of two. Now, I think Moment existed. Well, he did. He existed well beyond or prior to the Bane and all that. We don't think we ever got an official timeline of where he existed. So the rule of two may not be his ideology. He may actually subscribe to the, hey, let's get the band back together and start, recruiting all these Sith and go back to the old ways. So that would be a way to get what I want, because I would love to see this renaissance of, the Sith and Jedi wars again, where we've got tons and tons
But
of Sith. And
Momin was such a unique case, though.
he is. I mean,
He wanted people to recognize his art, basically, right?
which was death.
Yeah, and well, suffering,
Mm-hmm.
the suspension of suffering, right? So you could feel it all the time. It was a devotion to the dark side like anything we've ever seen before.
Yeah.
It was the true worship of the dark side for what it was, or his interpretation of what it was. But still, that was a very different interpretation of the Force, I think, in general, especially when it comes to the Sith. Do you really consider Momin an actual Sith in that regard, or is he very much an outlier?
I think he's certainly a Sith Lord in title. He's got a level of power that I don't think we've seen in a very long time. Like, he's up there with the Daydu and he was successful. I mean, now granted, he didn't get into a body, but he arguably got into something much more powerful, right? Unless that object is destroyed, he's always going to be around. There's always the potential for him to come out. So from that regard, I think he's certainly powerful. I don't know if again, it really depends on what we get into. Like, when we talk about a Sith Lord and what that title means, and we can get into we're not going to do it tonight, but you get into the meaning of what a Sith Lord is and the title of Darth, right? Darth being, there's all these different reasons, different translations of Darth, but I think the one that I subscribe to is that it is a word that came from the Rakata, meaning victory through death, right? Or immortality is where Darth comes from. So what I'm saying is, depending on what title he takes and where he came from, I think he probably is of that line, but I would agree he's very different in his approach, very different in what he wants, which actually wouldn't be a bad thing, because we've had enough of this whole Sith and Jedi wars and stuff like that. I mean, that'd be cool, but to have a dark side presence that truly is in it for
culture,
suffering.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be pretty dark. All right. And because we saw what he did.
Yeah. It would be pretty terrible.
Yeah. So that'd be refreshing. Terribly refreshing.
It would be.
So those are the three ways, I guess, that I could think that they would be able to bring them up. I just don't know enough about what Luke has done. Like, it feels like Luke would have he would have been going around trying to prevent this from ever happening again.
Well, I think that's why the Jedi had the Bogan collection too, right? So the Jedi of old collected these things and they wanted to bury them, mostly to keep them safe, but I think also to prevent certain, people from being able to accumulate them and learn from them and corrupt otherwise good people who maybe just had character flaws.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine Luke probably did some of the same too. But I think Luke was also on a journey to learn more about the Jedi. And to learn more about the Jedi, you have to learn more about the Sith.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just so hand in hand. You can't have one without the other at some point in time. Especially if he goes back and he's looking at it from the perspective, how did they escape the Jedi of old and never be even noticed, with all of this? And I think that's where the rule of two is, quite profound. That's where it actually works, is that it's very difficult to track. And even if you find one lead, it might dry up if they did a really good job of snuffing everyone out.
The and I think we'll end it there. I did want to just mention I didn't get a chance to talk about Jeff's comment. He said the timing of the rule of two concept was always interesting to me. Star Wars has always been partially Lucas commentary on power structures and government. Tough to tell if it was lore driven or external. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to. I can't think of and I'm not a political science major by any means, or historian by any means. I do dabble it from time to time, but I can't think of in a real world example. I mean, outside of somebody like, I mean, even like somebody like Hitler was really about, the Aryan race. I think there was certainly elements of selfishness there with him. But to think that someone was moving towards only two of us, even like if you think larger scale, the Axis power and how they came about in World War II, that was what, three? It was Italy, Japan, and Germany.
Right.
I mean, it was more of like Hitler saying, yeah, sure, go ahead. And I don't really care about that land. And yeah, it was more convenience than, hey, let's bond together and be three nations kind of thing. That wasn't how it went about. So it is hard to think of an example of a political science example where that happened. But who knows? There was somebody.
Thinking about Palpatine and like you talk about government structures, Palpatine got rid of the Senate. So when you think about, he consolidated power within really truly the rule of two. I mean, him predominantly, but then his enforcer, right, with Vader.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very much I think very much he brought everyone into line with the rule of two and made it very clear, who was truly in charge. Although the more material we get, the more chaotic everything seems like it actually was. But oh, and there's Alex showing up at the very last minute.
Of course. Okay. Any final thoughts? This has been fun, man. I really enjoyed talking about this. Again, it's been something I've been wanting to talk about for a very long time, and I'm glad we got the opportunity to do it because it was kind of a cool break from the High Republic stuff. But any final thoughts on the Rule of Two, Dark Side, any of that?
I agree. This has been very refreshing to kind of, I don't know, unpack some of the things that we've learned, I think, from High Republic and some of the other material in between, and be able to bridge it across generations is pretty neat. And tie it between movies and the books and Legends, I think, even too, is just really cool to do. So this was really, I like this. This is a lot of fun. We need to do this more often again. Within all of the content that we get that are now canon, or what's upcoming canon, which of course we can't really complain too much about, but these are a lot of fun. And I like that there's always more to gather from these characters. And I mean, seriously, how much longer do we have to go before we start learning more about Plagueis and Tenebris? I mean, seriously. And before we get
well
new,
overdue.
Right. And that, I mean, and also that we get more canonical content for Bane and Revan.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, all of the conversation, you can't not talk about those characters when you talk about this subject, or really about the Sith in general. And so these are things that we really need to have refreshed. And it'd be really cool if, Drew, I always mispronounce his last name, Carpathian, right? Yeah. So Drew Carpathian, it would be great if he came back and revisited these characters, much like Tim Zahn has with Thrawn. It'd be really, really cool. He wrote the trilogy for those 3 books for Bane. And so I think it would be really cool for him to come back and revisit that materials and give us a refreshed take on it in a more modern Star Wars canonical aspect of things.
And bring back Abel Pena too.
There you go.
I'm being serious. I'd like to see him back and doing something.
But no, this was a lot of fun. I'm glad you brought this topic up, and hopefully we can squeeze a few more of these in here longer term.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Coming up, we've got Thursday. Going to be doing a Patreon show with some Patreon folks. We'll be talking about Ben Solo himself. I've already given them the notes. I'm sure they're taking copious notes at this point, and preparing every minute of the day for that show.
And Albert is doing the same with screenshots of Ben Swolo and Adam Driver without a shirt.
Without a shirt, yep.
You're welcome, folks.
So we'll be talking about that.
Tune in. He will be live streaming.
Yeah. And that'll be a Patreon episode only. So we'll release that on Patreon. And then next week we'll come back and we're going to hit up the Fallen Star. We'll do Bell and Buryaga. We've also got Stellan and Elzar coming up soon. Jonesy's already done the artwork for those. Thank you for doing that, sir. You have to change that? No, you don't. And then we're going to start rolling into, we've got some Inquisitor stuff that we've been talking about doing ahead of the Kenobi premiere. So, and then we've got obviously Celebration, where we'll be on the podcast stage doing our show about the High Republic and Fallen Jedi, which is gonna be fun. Yeah,
That's going to be all Kenobi all the time.
all
Month of
Kenobi all the
June.
time.
Yep. How about we do a few shout outs?
Go ahead.
All right. So again, we do live stream for the shows, both on the general release show as well as Patreon. So tune into YouTube or Facebook, probably the easiest ones to catch the stream. But Jonathan, Jeff, Hard Countered, Steph, Lauren, Twan, Caleb, good to see you again. Ken, good to see you again. Big Boss 100, welcome. And then Alex, pulling in the rear. Thank you all for showing up. We actually had a really good showing of folks in the background too. Not necessarily chatting, but a lot of great chat and people watching. So we do really appreciate you coming out. If you'd like to get in touch with us, eargluemedia.com/Discord is the best way to find us. You can hang out with us on Discord. Lots of great chats in there across all of Earglue Media's content, as well as Cantina Cast, Star Wars, collecting, movies, you name it, we've got it. Whiskey, beer, all sorts of good stuff. What?
I'm just laughing because it was a segue right into whiskey,
do-
beer.
Well, and cereal too.
We got a
we hit
cereal
all the-
channel. Yeah.
We hit all the important stuff. So, and I didn't name the meme channel. I just named all the really popular ones.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Right. Beer, whiskey, memes, and well, no, y'all have had there's been another one with the film appraisers lately. It's been a lot of fun to watch. I guess there's some little, you try to pick the movie based on screenshots or screen captures, but they're pretty obscure screens.
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever they're doing over there. It seems cool. They seem to be having a great time. But yeah, so eargluemedia.com/Discord. You can find all of our great shows on eargluemedia.com, of course. And if you'd like to send us an email, hello there at cantinacast.com. And then Albert, we have a phone number apparently.
We do. The phone number is 803-717-CAST. That's 803-717-2278.
For the price of less than a penny a day. You can, speaking of pennies a day, if you'd like to contribute on Patreon, we'd love to have you. Again, everything that you guys donate to us does get put right back into the show. Patreon.com/the Cantina Cast. And again, you get all of our back content. You get early release to these shows and anything else that we kind of randomly want to do from time to time. So we would love to have you join us over there as well. Did I tick all the boxes?
Yep. We're done. Let me turn this ticker off because otherwise that'll show up in the yeah, that's going to do it for us. We will see you guys here Thursday if you're going to join us for the Patreon show. Otherwise, we'll be back here next Tuesday to talk more The High Republic.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.